Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for another healthy eating webinar. Today, our topic's a little different. We're focusing on eating well to manage your blood sugar. My name is Veronica and I'm a dietitian. I'm co-presenting today with my registered dietitian colleague Fatim that I work with at the Toronto Rehab Cardiac Rehab program. The ground rules are, as usual, they include that this session is for education only. And at the bottom of our screen, there's the little box that says Q&A. We encourage you to use this icon to write questions as we go throughout today's session. Just remember that these questions should be general because we can't answer specific questions at this time. If you have something very specific you want to ask, we just encourage you to follow up with your registered dietitian or healthcare professional. So today's session, as I mentioned, is about managing our blood sugar. About 50% of individuals living with heart disease are also living with diabetes. So that's what we plan to discuss today. What will hopefully help you understand what foods raise your blood sugar. We'll discuss how often you should eat, as well as learning how to plan meals to manage your blood sugar. Great. Now that we're done with the formalities, again, I want to thank you for joining today and welcome you to today's session. So let's start by talking about why nutrition is important. The past few months, Fatim and I have been discussing how healthy eating can lower our LDL cholesterol, or our bad cholesterol, also known as lousy cholesterol, how it can manage our blood pressure. But today we plan to discuss how it can lower our A1C, or manage our blood sugar. So A1C stands for a 3-month average, or 3-month blood sugar average. And this is something that you can get measured when you go get your lab work done. And healthy eating actually can lower our A1C number by 1 to 2%, which is pretty significant. This lowering effect is as much, and actually sometimes more than some of the diabetes medications that are on the market. So healthy eating is really effective to manage our blood sugar. Today, when we are going to be speaking about healthy eating for blood sugar, we are going to consider 3 different questions. We want to discuss what we eat, when we eat, and how much we eat, because all 3 of these things matter. And that's why these 3 questions are the outline for today's session. We will discuss the right type of food to answer the what. We'll discuss the right time to answer the when, and we'll discuss the right amount of food to answer the how much should we eat. I'm going to start with asking the audience. So if you could use the chat icon at the bottom of your screen to answer this question. What foods do you think raise your blood sugar? So I'll give you a few seconds here to contribute to the chat box. So I see sweets and junk food, juice. Anything else? So definitely sweets, junk food, and juice. Those 3 foods definitely increase our blood sugar. Oh, I have some more here. Great. Bread, pasta, fried foods, cookies, fruit, fruit salad, starch, sweets and pastries, simple sugars, starches, baked goods with white flour. Absolutely, this is great. Thanks for contributing some wonderful foods here. And I definitely agree with all of them. So when we talk about foods, it helps if we could classify them into the 3 different macronutrients that are in our food system. So one of the macronutrients is called carbohydrate, another one's called protein, and then there's another one called fat. So carbohydrates are actually our body's main source of energy. It acts like gasoline in a car. So these carbohydrates turn into sugar when they're digested, and then they go into our bloodstream, and our working muscles and our brain then use this sugar to help them work. We cannot live without sugar in our blood. So these carbohydrates, as mentioned here, are our main source of energy. Protein is the next macronutrient, and that one helps us build and repair our muscles, as well as our body after damage or stress. So this is also important after exercise. We need protein to help rebuild those muscles. And fat helps us absorb fat-soluble vitamins. It also can help support cell growth and produce hormones. So what do you think when we think about macronutrients? What one of the 3 that are listed here, carbohydrate, protein, or fat, do you think raises our blood sugar? If you could contribute in the chat box, what do you think? And exactly, you guys are exactly right. It's the carbohydrates that are the ones that are going to increase our blood sugar. So just in summary, all foods that we eat are made up of these 3 nutrients, carbohydrate, protein, and fat, and we need a mix of these at each meal to help our body function. And so we'll be discussing these 3 macronutrients in detail and what foods, what they look like in the foods that we eat. Next slide here. So you're right, carbohydrates is the one that is the food, or is the macronutrient that increases our blood sugar. So let's start with that, carbohydrates. If you're living with diabetes, this is the macronutrient. You do want to watch just the type of carbohydrate that you're eating and the amount of carbohydrate that you're eating, as well as how much or how often. So remember the what and when and how much. As I said before, we want our blood to have sugar in it because it helps to feed our brain and muscles. So we expect our blood sugar to go up and down throughout the day, and that happens to everybody's body, whether you're living with diabetes or not. So that's what we want to try to do with the food that we eat. We want to eat some of these carbohydrates at each of our meals, not too much, but just enough to make our blood sugar go up to help those muscles and our brain function. So when we look at what foods have carbohydrates, that when the foods that I guess are listed on the screen are the ones that have carbohydrates. So all fruit have carbohydrate, and some starchy vegetables also contain carbohydrates. So those things are like corn, yam, potato, squash, plantain, dasheen. And then other vegetables are not actually considered carbohydrate because they don't raise our blood sugar. And those vegetables are things like asparagus, broccoli, beets, carrots, cucumber, eggplant. So it's only the starchy vegetables that we consider the ones that have carbohydrate. Other foods that have carbohydrate are our grains. So those are things like bread, bagels, cereals, pita, quinoa, barley, muffins, pasta, as well as our milk and alternatives have carbohydrate, and that would be things like milk, yogurt, our ice cream would fall into here. And interestingly, cheese actually does not have carbohydrate. It has the other 2 macronutrients, so it has fat and protein in it. So that's the exception there. And then when we think about our meat and alternatives, they actually don't have carbohydrate, but there is an exception, and that is legumes. So legumes are legumes are things like lentils, chickpeas, kidney beans. They're extremely healthy for us, for our heart. They help with cholesterol, blood pressure. They also help with our blood sugar control because they have a really great type of fiber in them. So we do want to include this type of meat alternative, but we just have to make sure that we know that it can increase our blood sugar. And then finally, as you mentioned, sugars and sweets also are foods that contain carbohydrates, and those are things like, white sugar, brown sugar, honey, but also things like pop or iced tea, juice, fruit drinks, cakes, cookies, those types of things. So the sweets and sugar and sweets, I guess, they are the foods that we do want to try to limit because they don't have a lot of nutrients attached to them. So they're what we call empty calories because there's not a lot of vitamins and minerals. So that's something, you can have a little bit of, but we want to watch how much because these are the ones that really increase our blood sugar. Now, before we go to the next slide, which is the protein macronutrient, I just want to emphasize that all of these foods do contain carbohydrates, and it's important to include these foods in our eating pattern because we do want our blood sugar to go up and down throughout the day. A lot of the time when I present that these foods have sugar to an audience, they sometimes think that we should be avoiding them, but I want you to know that we want our blood sugar to go up and down throughout the day. We just want it to not go up too high too quickly. So we want to make sure that we're eating a lot of fiber that goes along with the carbohydrate, and that will help to avoid those blood sugar spikes. So when we think about fiber, that means, eating the skin of your fruits and vegetables. That will help not spike your blood sugar when you're eating those carbohydrate fruits and vegetables. When you're eating grain products, you want to be choosing whole grain products. So that would be, switching maybe your white rice for your brown rice to offer more fiber. And then, as I mentioned, trying to limit how much sugar and sweets you have because they don't have any fiber in them at all. So they're really going to spike your blood sugar. Great. So next is protein. So what foods have protein? Remember, protein doesn't raise our blood sugar. So it's actually an important macronutrient to eat when you're also eating carbohydrates because this actually helps to stabilize our blood sugar. They help to balance each other out. These protein foods are things like fish, so that could be canned, frozen, or fresh fish, meat, that's, our beef, pork, lamb, as well as poultry, so our chicken and turkey. Soy would be things like tofu or tempeh, our eggs, nuts and seeds, as well as their nut butter. So that would be things like peanut butter, almond butter, legumes, cheese, and then finally milk also contains protein. So like I said, you want to pair these protein foods with carbohydrate foods to make balanced snack or meal because it helps to stabilize the blood sugar. Now I'm going to ask you, the audience, what foods listed here, what protein foods are the ones that contain carbohydrate? So maybe use that chat box again to contribute your answers. Are there any ones listed here that contain carbohydrates? Awesome. So I see both milk and legumes. So those are exactly right. You got it. Those are the two foods listed here, the protein foods that we just have to remember also have the carbohydrates in them, so they will increase their blood sugar. So lastly, we'll discuss fat. That's the last macronutrient. What foods have fat? That would be our oils, our nuts and seeds, fish are a good source of fat, margarine, butter, avocado, as well as animal meats. So they all contain fat. Now, what does everyone think about these foods here? Do any of these fat foods contain carbohydrates? Maybe you can use the chat box to answer that question. Oops. Are there any fat foods here that you think are increasing our blood sugar? Just wait a second for some answers. So it's actually a trick question. None of the fat foods listed here actually increase our blood sugars too much. They don't really contain a large amount of carbohydrate foods. So you can keep that in mind. When we are looking at fat though, there are different types of fat in our food system. So we want to be eating some types more than others. There's a type that's called unsaturated fat, something called saturated fat, and something called trans fat. Unsaturated fats are the healthier types of fats that can lower our cholesterol levels. And those are things like olive oil, avocado, nuts and seeds, margarines, as well as fish. So those are the healthier types of fat that we want to include. This is also a nice macronutrient to pair with the carbohydrates because it does, again, help to stabilize the blood sugar. It helps to prevent the spike of the blood sugar. So try to choose those healthier types of fat more often. Saturated fat are usually paired usually found in the animal types of fat. So that would be things like butter, as well as animal meat. So things like bacon and maybe the skin on your poultry. Those are the ones we don't want to have too much of. And then finally, trans fats are the ones that we want to avoid because those can actually increase our bad cholesterol and lower our good cholesterol. And those are things like baked goods or shortening. So we want to limit those completely. So I hope that answers the question about what we should eat. We want to be eating all three of these macronutrients, and we want to be choosing carbohydrates that have more fiber. We want to include proteins, maybe more plant proteins than animal proteins because they have more fiber. And then the fats, we want to be including some of those healthier types of fats that have unsaturated fat, the olive oil, avocado, nuts and seeds, and fish more often. So I'm going to pass it on to Fatim here to answer the other two questions.
Okay, great. Thanks so much, Veronica. So now that we've learned about the different types of macronutrients and what our foods are made of, let's talk a little bit about when we should eat. So we learn that when we eat carbohydrates, they cause our blood sugar to go up. And we need, as Veronica said, we need this rise to help transport sugars to fuel our brain and our muscles. Between meals, you'll see that our blood sugars go down. And our goal over the course of the day is to have nice gentle curves in our blood sugar. So it will go up and down, but what we want to avoid are sharp spikes and then crashes to our blood sugar. So what this means for most people is that eating every 4 to 6 hours or having at least 3 meals per day is a good idea. It's also important to try to have your meals around the same time each day. And we know that eating in this pattern will prevent low blood sugars and also prevent you from getting too hungry between meals. So things to think about. If your meals are greater than 4 to 6 hours apart, that's where you might need a snack. Snacks are optional and they may depend on how hungry you are, what medication you're taking, and your exercise level. Before you exercise, it's always a good idea to check the time and think about when you last ate. And so if it's been more than 4 to 6 hours since your last meal, it's a good idea to have a healthy snack. You might have a piece of fruit or some yogurt. A healthy snack can help prevent a low blood sugar during exercise. And we're going to come back to these snacks in a minute. So if we talk about now meal planning. So how do we know what our meals should look like? This picture shows something that we call the plate method. And the plate method is a really easy way to know how much food and how much carbohydrate to eat at each meal. So if you look at the plate, you'll notice that it's divided into 3 parts. The first step is to start filling half your plate with different vegetables. You want to try to pick different colors because the different colors will give you different nutrients and antioxidants. Your vegetables can be fresh or frozen or canned, and they can be eaten raw or cooked. It's up to you. So at least 2 varieties, lots of color on your plate is always a great idea. The next step is to look at the quarter plate of your starch that includes those grains and starches. These are the foods, if you remember, that will raise your blood sugar. So you want to think about the quantity, and you also want to look at higher fiber choices. So things like sweet potato, brown rice, whole grain bread or pasta, maybe some quinoa or corn. You might have noticed I said potato and corn there, and these are actually 2 vegetables that we don't include in that half plate of vegetables, but that we include under the grains and starches because they are very starchy. And then you can also include a glass of milk and a piece of fruit. These foods also contribute to carbohydrates and they can raise your blood sugar, but you might need them just to balance out your meal and just fulfill your hunger. The last step in terms of planning your meal is to fill that last quarter with your protein foods. And these can be things like lean meat, poultry, fish, tofu, those legumes like your beans and lentils. So when you're planning your meal, some things to remember. It's always important to try to keep that carbohydrate amount about the same at your main meal. So you want to try to keep it consistent. This will help to keep those blood sugars at a healthy range. It's also important to include a lot of variety. So eating healthy doesn't have to be boring. You can add a lot of variety. And that also makes sure that you get the right balance of nutrients. You might want to think back to foods that we have talked about from that Mediterranean pattern of eating or that DASH pattern of eating. So, including things like lots of whole grains, the fruits and vegetables, the legumes, the fish, just to balance out that meal and make it a healthy meal. So I'm going to show you a few examples. So here we go with a plate, and you'll notice if we start off with the vegetables, we have a combination of both a salad as well as some cooked vegetables. And again, you can choose vegetables the way you enjoy them. So it might be a salad, they might be grilled or steamed, a stir fry, part of a soup or a curry. It's completely up to you. But in terms of amount, you want to think half my plate is full of those vegetables. You'll notice here there's a quarter plate of protein, so a lean meat or a chicken, and then there's a quarter plate of brown rice or quinoa, or just something to fill that starch. Another way to sort of measure your portions is to think of your hand. And if you think of your vegetables, you're going to do 2 handfuls of vegetables. When you think of your protein, maybe take a look at the palm of your hand. And that's roughly about 4 ounces of protein for most people, and that's what would fill that quarter plate. And then lastly, if you look at sort of a cupped handful of the starchy foods, that would be enough to fill that quarter plate. Now, when we're using the plate method, it doesn't always have to look exactly as this picture shows and divided into 3 parts. If we look at our next example, you'll see you can sort of arrange it the way you want and you can mix things up. It's also important, to keep to the foods you enjoy. Don't ignore your traditions and foods you normally eat. So here, for example, we have some South Asian foods. You'll notice with the vegetables, we have some okra that's been cooked. There's some salad with some tomatoes and cucumbers. With the protein, there's actually some chicken curry there. And then you'll notice with the starch, we have some whole grain chapatis and a little bit of rice. So you can mix things up as long as sort of the proportions are about the same. And then also sometimes, we're cooking things like casseroles or mixed dishes. I mentioned soups. Might not look like 3 separate quantities of different food, but it might all be mixed together. So you'll notice on this plate, there's some noodles, but also lots of those colorful vegetables. There's some tofu or chicken on there as well. So although it's mixed up, if you were to separate it out, you're still doing that half a plate of vegetables, a quarter plate of your grains and starches, and a quarter plate of your protein. So you can think about pretty much any type of food you're eating and think of ways to balance it out. So I mentioned a soup. So for example, if you had a vegetable soup and then you added maybe some beans or lentils for the protein, maybe there were some noodles in there, you have your 3 parts. And that could be a complete meal as well. And again, you might round that off with a piece of fruit or a glass of milk or some plain yogurt, and you're balancing out those macronutrients, your protein, your carbs, and your fats. Okay, so I mentioned snacking. So sometimes we do need snacks, and I think a lot of people will think that maybe snacking is not such a great idea, but I think when you're living with diabetes, it might be necessary, especially if your meals are farther apart. Maybe your schedule doesn't allow you to eat meals between 4 and 6 hours apart. Maybe you're very active, you're doing different exercises. Maybe your medication is something that you don't want to experience low blood sugars with. So maybe you can think about some snacks that might be healthy options, and think back to what Veronica has said about the proteins and the carbohydrates and the fats, and maybe you can type some examples of healthy snacks into the chat box. So I'll give you a minute. Maybe if you can think of some snacks that you've been eating, or snacks that you think might be healthy. So I see a few ideas. So we see nuts and seeds, carrot, celery, and cheese, nuts with yogurt, hummus and veggies. Great examples. Fruit, and again, the fruit can be fresh or it can be dry. Apple slices with peanut butter. There's a delicious snack. So all excellent suggestions. Thank you, everyone. So if we look at our snacks, a healthy snack might include some carbohydrate. So it might come from fruit, or it might come from dairy, or it might come from your grains. And just to keep you full longer and also keep those blood sugars more stable, as Veronica mentioned, it's a good idea to choose something that's higher in fiber, but also maybe include something that has a little bit of protein to keep you, again, full longer and keep your blood sugar stable. So there are those apples with some nut butter. You might do some whole grain crackers with cheese, or hummus, which is made with those chickpeas. So it does have a little bit of carbohydrate, but it's also very good in terms of the protein, and dip some veggies in, you get another boost of fiber. Avocado on a piece of toast, very tasty. It's a healthy fat, and avocados are also full of fiber. So they keep you full and they help stabilize your blood sugar. Sometimes it's just as simple as grabbing a handful of nuts or seeds, and you can choose any type you like, whether it's almonds or cashews or pecans, walnuts. Pick the ones you like, a small handful, and then you see that yogurt with some fruit. So when you are choosing things like yogurt, just to avoid the extra added sugar, try to pick the plain yogurt and then flavor it up with the natural sugar and the fiber that you're getting from fresh or frozen fruits. So just some ideas there in terms of snacking. So I think at this point, we're going to open it up to the question and answers. So if you do have any questions, you can type them into the Q&A box, and Veronica and I will do our best to answer them.
Great, thanks, Fatim. We'll just wait a couple more seconds to see if any questions come in.
I guess while we're waiting, I'll just mention that the information that Veronica and I have covered today is available on the website. So if you look under diabetescollege.ca and the Eat Healthy section, there's lots of information about the different nutrients we talked about and how to plan a healthy meal and meal timing, and some great videos there as well that you can watch.
Yeah, that's great, Fatim. I think everyone's aware of the Cardiac College, but there's also the diabetescollege.ca website. So thank you. Oh, so there's one question. That's great. Thank you. The question is, are nuts like almonds good skinless as well? And I think when you do remove some of the skin from the nuts, you are removing some of the fiber. So ideally, it would be great if you could eat them with the skin on them. But eating nuts without the skin are very healthy as well. They will still have some fiber, and they still have those healthy fats, as well as a lot of the vitamins and minerals, those other nutrients in them. So I think the most important thing when we are buying nuts is that they are unsalted when we're buying them, because we don't want too much salt. As we know, too much salt can increase our blood pressure. So that would be what I would look for when you're buying nuts. Great question, thanks.
Okay, another question's come up. Are proteins from legumes complete, or only meat proteins are complete? Great question. So when we look at our protein foods, they're made up of different amino acids, and our body needs certain ones on a daily basis. Now, when we eat meat, we get all of those amino acids all together, so we do call meat a complete protein. When we come to legumes, we're very close to a complete protein. And what we know is that for most people, you know, you can eat a vegetarian or a vegan diet and still get all your protein requirements, because for most of us, we're not only just eating the legumes, but we're eating other protein foods throughout the day. And I think old school thinking was we need to combine different vegetable proteins at one meal. But the way we think now is it doesn't really matter, and legumes can be just as good of a protein source as your meat over the course of the day.
Great, thank you. Another question reads, what I understand makes the difference is what kind of food combinations that we eat together. So if I understand this correctly, we do recommend eating a couple macronutrients at the same time. So that's your carbohydrates, your protein, and your fat. Remember, carbohydrates are the ones that are increasing our blood sugar. But in order to help prevent the spike of the blood sugar, eating fat or protein with the carbohydrate can actually help to blunt that response, the blood sugar spiking response. And that's because fat and protein take a little bit longer to digest in the stomach. So it prevents the blood sugar from leaving the stomach quickly. It slowly releases the sugar into our bloodstream. So yes, eating carbohydrate foods with fat and protein does help control your blood sugar.
Okay, thank you. So a couple questions about nuts. Do roasting nuts improve their value? So I don't think in terms of the nutrient content or fiber, roasting would change that. But I do think that in terms of taste, roasting really enhances or brings out the taste of nuts. So if you enjoy them roasted, that's perfectly fine to do. And then for walnuts, should we soak it for a while? I think, again, that's a personal preference. You know, if you find nuts a little harder to eat or harder to chew, you know, you can soak them. It'll soften them up. But in terms of nutrient value, I don't think it'll change it much.
Great, and a comment came in too that just read roasted peanuts are very good, and I definitely agree with that. There's also, you could always add spices to your nuts and seeds when you're roasting them, and I find that helps to just give it a little bit more variety when you're eating them. You could do something sweet like cinnamon or something spicy and add cayenne to them. And another question came in about milk alternatives. What are milk alternatives, and can you list some? So milk alternatives, it means alternatives to cow's milk. So that would be things like plant-based milks. That could be soy milk, that can be almond milk. There's other types of milk like goat milk, coconut milk. There's a whole bunch of different milks actually on the market now. We have a great video. It's just 2 to 3 minutes on our website about how to choose a milk. So I would encourage you to link back and view that video because it helps you to identify what things to look at on the food label and in the ingredient list. But when we are looking at milk alternatives, when we're thinking about our blood sugar, we want to make sure that we're choosing the unsweetened versions because sometimes they'll be sweetened with things like vanilla. So we want to, you could read the ingredient list to make sure sugar isn't listed on the ingredient list, and that will help you to buy one that's unsweetened. And sometimes it will even say unsweetened right on the front of the package. So that's what I would focus on when you're watching your blood sugar.
Yeah, so there are great alternatives. I'll just add that oftentimes I get clients who say, well, I don't like milk or milk alternatives. I'm not a big milk drinker, so a glass of milk might not seem that appealing. In that case, you can look for things like yogurt, and you can find ones made with dairy or alternatives. You might try things like lower fat cheese, like cottage cheese or ricotta cheese. You can try things like kefir, so a lot of alternatives as well if you're not a big milk drinker.
That's great. Thanks, Fatim, for adding that. It's important. And another question about foods that support muscle. So the comment is, I'm having a lot of muscle tightness and cramps during the night. And sometimes the nutrient magnesium actually helps with that. It helps with muscle relaxation. And foods that are rich in magnesium are things like legumes. So that's our black beans, kidney beans, chickpeas, lentils, as well as those nuts and seeds. So any type of nuts and seeds would be important to include there. Even things like tofu, our omega-3 rich seeds like flax seeds, those all are good sources of magnesium. So I would encourage you to include those and see if that helps.
Okay, I think that's it for the questions. Thank you all so much for participating, and I hope you found the session useful today.
Yes, I agree. Thanks for participating in our chat as well as those questions. So thank you. And I'll just do a plug for tomorrow's session, which is with Rob, and that's the walk and talk that he's been doing. That combines the exercise as well as a little bit of education. So we encourage you to tune in for that. And then next week, there will not be a Women with Heart online session. They're taking the week off because of Canada Day week, and people may be taking holidays, but they do plan to be back the following week. So that's the July 7th at 10 a.m. and that will be a live exercise class with one of our cardiac rehab supervisors. So tune into that. And then that's it. So thanks again for joining and your contribution, and we'll see you again soon.
Thanks, everyone.